Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition, another episode, another broadcast, another program of Chatting with the G-Man. Before we start, we want to remind you to remember those who are still suffering from the hurricanes, both Harvey and Irma. Pray for them, think about them, support them, donate to the cause for relief for those persons who have been impacted by those hurricanes. God bless you. To my wife, Lady T, Teresa Jeanette Scott, glad that you're with us this afternoon. We want to, as we said before, remember the people that have been victims, families and friends of both Hurricane and Harvey and Hurricane Irma, who devastated the Gulf Coast, in particular Texas and Louisiana, and of course Irma, who's just left, who had devastation throughout the Caribbean, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, the Bahamas, St. Thomas, St. Croix, all those islands leading up to Florida, and the entire state of Florida. The entire state of Florida was impacted by Hurricane Irma, and of course Hurricane Harvey impacted Texas, much of Texas, and Louisiana. So our prayers, our thoughts, our hearts go out to these families, friends, and neighbors that are still battling the aftermath of these tremendous hurricanes. The numbers were 4 and 5 in intensity. Irma was considered a monster storm, the extent of which she impacted the eastern seaboard. And now we're bracing for Hurricane Jose, the third, the trilogy, if you will, of these two other hurricanes. Now he's sitting there in the Atlantic Ocean, stationed there. They're looking at him now moving. Hurricane used to be all named women, now they're named men and women. They're now looking to him to move eastward toward the eastern seacoast, missing. They believe they're going to miss. He's going to miss Florida and go a little further north, which would impact North Carolina and the Carolinas, Virginia, and maybe even Delaware and Pennsylvania. We have to watch that. Good afternoon, Deidre, our friend from Philadelphia. We want to remind you to keep the news channels on, keep the weather channels on for Hurricane Jose. For those who want to help those that are needing assistance there in Texas and Louisiana and Florida, throughout the Caribbean, we want you to know that there are some reliable, trusted organizations that you can contact and donate to. One is the American Red Cross, the other is Save Our Children, and the other is the Convoy of Hope. You can find all three of these by way of your internet. The American Red Cross, Save Our Children, and the Convoy of Hope. These three agencies, and there's many others, but we thought if you could start with these three, you could certainly help the relief efforts to our southern neighbors, to our neighbors in the South, who are still digging up. Death tolls increasing by the numbers. I understand that there was a nursing home and all the clients therein, or the majority of them, died, or at least a significant number of them died because there was no air conditioning and the heat was so sweltering that it killed these elderly citizens of Florida. Prayers go out to their families. If we just pause just for a minute to remember them. Remember those who survived. Remember those who are still being hospitalized. Remembering those who lost their lives and those that are still battling to find their life again. Billions of dollars lost in property. Homes lost by the hundreds of thousands. Damaged significantly. Millions of people there in Florida still going without electricity. Even now, they're looking at maybe a week or so before the entire state has electricity again. I have family down there. Cousins and acquaintances and friends down in those areas, even in the Caribbean. My wife and I know a bishop down there, Bishop Greg Roberts, who we are praying for him and others who are down south, who are down in Florida and Texas. We have grandchildren in Texas. Thank God that the devastation of Hurricane Harvey was not so bad where they live. But they know many people in other parts of the state that were devastated. Those in Houston, Texas, those in Corpus Christi, they were devastated extremely so. And they're still suffering under the onslaught. And as are Florida and all of the Caribbean islands, still being devastated by the onslaught of Hurricanes Harvey and Hurricane Irma. Tornadoes spun from each of those hurricanes and damaged other properties within those states. So our hearts and our minds go out to them. We pray that President Trump and the federal and the state governments of those locales will do all that they can do to support and to rebuild the lives of those Floridians and those Texans and those Louisianans that were impacted by these great storms. I don't know what Jose is going to do, but once again, it's balling up, it's spinning up to be now a hurricane, and we don't know what path it's going to take, but all eyes are looking to Jose. Keep your Weather Channel on. Many of you have Weather Channel. All of you have local weather forecast. So please keep your televisions on, your radios on, your internet on to see the path of Jose and whether it will impact the mainland of the United States or any other surrounding area in our region. With that in mind, we want to now continue with our topic for today. On Monday past, we discussed and we were talking about euthanasia, which is, quote, mercy killing. And we talked about it, and we talked about the various forms of mercy killing, assisted suicide. We talked about involuntary, voluntary euthanasia. And we talked about some of the safeguards that those who purport and those who support this method of execution, I believe, in murder, use. They say there's safeguards to make sure that those persons other than those who are designated are not impacted by this mercy killing. For example, it was noted last time that no disability advocacy group, none in the entire world, endorses euthanasia in any of its forms, whether it be physician-assisted, whether it be voluntary, involuntary, consenting, whatever form it's in. The disability community as a whole, universally, are opposed to the very concept and the intent of euthanasia. The argument against this was made clear the last time that we met, but I will highlight a few points that we need to go over before we move on to what we're meant to discuss today. We discussed how the so-called safeguards put in place by those within the Right to Die movement have changed many times over the years. For example, the original safeguard against abuse of euthanasia, of abuse of mercy killings, was that they were only reserved for people who were terminally ill. Your life expectancy had to be from 6 months to a year. Terminally ill. No one else would be, it would be considered a candidate for mercy killing. No one else would be considered a candidate for mercy killing unless you only had 6 months to a year to live. That's changed. Now they've included terminally ill and incurable conditions. Incurable conditions. I thought about that one. I thought about that hard. I have an incurable condition. I was born with cerebral palsy, was diagnosed at 14 months old. Good afternoon, Bishop Davis. I was diagnosed at 14 months old having cerebral palsy. That's an incurable condition. In 2001, my wife was diagnosed with having lupus, another incurable condition. Many conditions, many diseases, many disabilities, many challenged abilities, both physical, developmental, and mental, can be classified as being incurable. So mercy killing, therefore, is now allowed for people who are terminally ill, which means 6 months to a year to live, and those that they consider incurable. To include incurable in the first safeguard against any abuse in using euthanasia opens the whole process to interpretation. How incurable must you be? Of course, incurable means just that, incurable. To what intensity must your incurable condition be? And then who decides? Now, I was born with cerebral palsy. I have what they consider a mild form of cerebral palsy. I was able to walk, though I walked with a noticeable limp. I used braces, or at least a brace on my right leg, because that's where it affects me on my right side, for many a year growing up, and then I used canes and other assistive devices. But I was mild in the sense that it did not affect my ability to speak. It did not affect my ability to think on certain levels. It did not impact me in that regard. I was able to walk. Though haltily, though significantly with a limp, I was able to do that. So, when we talk, but I'm still incurable. Which means there's nothing that's going to come along unless something does come along, but there's nothing right now that's out there that cures cerebral palsy. Nothing. And while there are millions of others who have the same condition, they vary from being mild to moderate to severe. From mild to moderate to severe. Which one would be entitled to be eliminated? Which one of the incurable degrees would be justified to end that individual's life? You have to be severely with the condition of cerebral palsy, unable to speak, unable to move, unable to, function. How about moderate? Those who may be in a wheelchair, but they still have all the other functions of their bodies, or maybe they're moderate in the sense that they may need crutches or whatever, but they still are able to function. What constitutes you being qualified to be a candidate for mercy killing, for euthanasia? And always I ask this question, and who determines it? Who will determine whose life is expendable? Who will determine whose life should end? And since the powers that be, whoever they are, because I don't know who they really are, extend the safeguard once, who will stop them? If in the near future or distant future they decide that incurable will be used in the broadest sense possible. The broadest sense possible would mean everybody, no matter what category you fall in, are candidates to be exterminated, liquidated, killed, murdered, annihilated. How far does it go? Good afternoon, Stephanie. How far will it go? Right now, we think about people who are severely physically, developmentally, or mentally challenged, severely, where they're not even able to function. They can't speak. They can't do this and that. And I'm going to tell you, even that's a sticky wicket to deal with. But who's to say someone will eventually say, I don't want to take a chance. I don't see the value in anyone with a disability existing. It's more trouble than it's worth to make accommodations for everyone who has a physical challenge, to adjust things just for them. See, when you get to that point, then that includes all of us. Because I need some things adjusted. I need a ramp. I need this. I need that. Who will eventually say, I don't think, why bother with all that? That's too much expense. People say it now. Churches say it. It's just too much expense to building ramps and elevators and lifts. Just too expensive to make my church accessible. Churches, religious leaders, religious officers, Christians and Muslims and Jewish persons are saying this. Too much trouble, too much finances, cost too much. There's not enough of them really to make that cost feasible. People already say that. I get on a bus sometime. Why do they gotta, why do they gotta get on? Man, now I gotta move. I don't think it's fair for them to get on this bus. Why can't they stay home like they used to? They ain't going nowhere important. Probably going to a doctor's visit. Here I gotta stand up because they gotta find room for them. I've heard it. I've heard bus drivers say, man, this is not even worth the pay. I should get more pay for this. What, for strapping in somebody? You're not lifting them onto the bus. There's a ramp that does that automatically. All you do is push a button. And you can't get up out your seat and strap somebody in with 2 or 3, maybe 4 straps, and that's it? What's the problem? It's a problem because we're a problem. And I see it. I see one day, if it goes unchecked, this idea of euthanasia, if it goes unchecked, if it goes beyond just terminally and incurable persons, but anybody, because I'm incurable. I have a condition that's incurable. My wife has a condition that's incurable. I know a whole lot of people that are born with certain physical, developmental, and mental challenges that unless there is a scientific breakthrough, they're going to live and die with that condition. So, there you have it. First safeguard said only those who are terminal. Now it's anybody who's incurable. And who's to say one day that does not literally mean everybody who's incurable. Well, there goes the first safeguard against abuse of mercy-killing processes and decisions that include that. There goes the safeguard. No longer terminally ill alone. Now it's also incurables as well. And what type of incurables and how incurable do you have to be? And how debilitating do you have to be? And how much of a trouble do you have to be in society before somebody says they ain't worth the bother? So there go the safeguard of that. If I can prove you're incurable, that's all she wrote. And you can prove I'm incurable because everybody knows there's no cure for cerebral palsy. Yeah, but Rev, you were a pastor and you contributed and you have a child and you have grandchildren, you're a husband, you're this, you're that. Yeah, but there may come a day. Because, once again, the definition has been broadened from just terminally ill to incurables. And who's to say that somebody won't interpret it? Who's to say that some judge or some legislator or some family member or some doctor will determine that this is too much bother? There's too much trouble. They're already trying to get rid of Medicaid and Medicare, which assist persons with physical, developmental, and mental challenges. They're trying already to challenge that, to limit it, to eliminate some programs. They're already trying to do it. Euthanasia is not that far-fetched. Touching lives that have physical, developmental, and mental challenges, not severe, but just who have those challenges alone. Who's to say that in order to save them dollars in this country and annihilate the deficit that this country owes. One way to do it is to allow those who are incurable and terminal to no longer be part of the equation. Another example that the right to die folk put in place as a safeguard is euthanasia would be used on people who are suffering extreme physical pain. So only those who are suffering extreme physical pain, terminally ill, and those experiencing extreme physical pain will be eligible for mercy-killing euthanasia. But once again, this too has been expanded. This too has been broadened. This too has been changed to include those who suffer with extreme emotional pain, psychological pain, other pain than just physical pain. See how they do it? They start off with the one that makes the most sense. Terminally ill, 6 months to live. Extreme physical pain. Who wants to go through all that? But eventually their true intent is manifested. Their true intent is revealed. On the one safeguard, it's revealed through including incurables. Then in the second safeguard, it's including not just extreme physical pain, but emotional pain. If you're going through emotional pain, psychological pain, you may be eligible to be a part of the mercy killing program. You see, to me, enlarging the pool of eligible candidates to include virtually everyone and anyone with a disability is all predicated on interpretation. Somebody back there, somebody around there, somebody in there, somebody out there decides on who is a candidate. 1973, from 1973 to this present time, through the endorsement and through the powers that be in the right to life and right to choice movement, right to choose movement, and the right to die movements, the Supreme Court have turned back every instance, as well as the other federal courts, as well as state courts, have turned back many state propositioned and governmental propositioned bills and other things that would have curbed abortions in some cases. The federal courts, the state courts have turned them back time and time again in favor of legalizing abortion. Another way of euthanizing, another way of mercy killing, another way of ending the life of a human being. That's what we're going to talk about today. The original claims of safeguards in terms of euthanasia has quickly widened. It is enlarging the pool of eligible candidates to include virtually everyone and anyone with a disability. Now let us turn our attention to the topic for this afternoon very quickly. We're going to be discussing, is abortion justified? Is abortion justified when the unborn baby is disabled? Is abortion justified when the unborn baby is disabled? In the New York Times, I'm going to read it to you. The New York Times recently published an article entitled, "My Abortion in the 23rd Week." The author explains that she was pregnant with twins, a boy and a girl, but that the boy was diagnosed with herniated diaphragm. he would require surgery and life support for a period of immediately after birth, but no indication that the child would have to be on this type of treatment for the rest of his life. No indication of that. He would have to be on life support for the beginning of his life, right after birth. He would require some surgery, but there was no indication that this herniated diaphragm would ultimately, permanently interfere with his life as he went along with life. The author, who is the mother, and her husband could not bear the thought of hearing him gasp for air. So they chose to have their son aborted with a lethal injection into his heart. Now keep in mind, the child's not even born yet. The doctor said that the child would need surgery and would have to be on support right after birth. Life support system right after birth. Nowhere does it say, at least not in this article, does it say that this was a permanent condition that would go with him for the rest of his life, that he would have multiple surgeries, that he would have to be on some kind of life support until the day he died, which would be maybe 60, 70, 80, 90 years old, whatever. No one says that. But they didn't like the idea right there they didn't like the idea that he would have to gasp for air. Now keep in mind, the child's not born yet. The child's not even born yet. But just the thought of their child gasping for air, they chose to have their son aborted with a lethal injection into his heart. The mother said, the author who writes this said, he died in a warm and loving place inside me. It was for his good, she thought. Boy was diagnosed with having a herniated diaphragm. Wasn't even born yet. They explained what that meant, I'm sure, and they described what it meant and what the impact would be. And they just couldn't take it. Just the thought of their son gasping for air. Just the thought their son had to go through surgery. Just the thought that their son would have to be on life support for any amount of time was just too much for them to bear. So they decided to have the child aborted. So the child was given a lethal injection into his heart. And she was satisfied in knowing that he died in a warm place inside of me. Is abortion justified in the case of fetal disability, deformity, or defect? Is it justified when an unborn child is expected to die during pregnancy or soon after? These circumstances, though they account for only a tiny fraction of abortions, are gut-wrenching. They are. They're hard decisions. Do I end my child's life because I believe that he's going to be gasping for air, he's going to have to go through surgery, he's going to have to go through a whole lot in his life, maybe for just a few years or maybe even for a few months? Do I put my child through that? It's a hard moral question. One that I don't take lightly, one that I don't look at lightly. Well, let me tell you this. There are 2 points about abortion of disabled babies that are important. First, ability or disability is irrelevant to the worth of a human being. A person's value, a person's worth, a person's place in this world, and the purpose of his being here in this world should not be predicated on whether they are disabled or abled. That's the first thing. We do not think less of people who have, or we should not, I should say, we should not think less of people who have disabilities, those who have challenged abilities. We should not think less of them, but we do. We know that. We just told you how many faith communities don't think about ramps because, it just costs too much. It's not worth it. We may pay our pastor millions of dollars. We may pay for a new edifice that costs millions of dollars, whatever the case. But we don't think having a ramp or a lift or elevator for a couple of people with disabilities, the ironic thing there is there's only a couple of people because you're not accessible. If you were accessible, how many more people in wheelchairs, how many more people who are deaf, how many more people who are blind or have other physical, developmental, or mental challenges, Down syndrome, autism, epilepsy, any one of them. How many more would you have if your building was accessible? But because you think it's not worth the cost, it's not accessible. But how much money does the church spend on salaries alone? Not just pastor, but the church musician, the church secretary, the pianist, the organist, everybody in the choir, everybody's getting a salary. You got a secretary, you got everybody getting a salary in the church. These edifices put the Taj Mahal to shame. As elaborate and glamorous and beautiful and structurally sound as they are. Candelabras. Benches that have warming seats. Air conditioners, central air conditioning, all the things, all the luxuries that are in the facilities, all the things that the church enjoys. And the bigger the church, the more luxurious it is. But we don't have the expense to include ramps that would allow people in wheelchairs or people who have difficulty walking to come into the church. We don't have deaf interpreters for those who only can understand sign language because they are either deaf, mute, or the both. We don't have braille literature for those who are blind, or large print literature for those who have difficulty in seeing. We don't want to put out that expense. We don't want to be bothered with that TTY machines. So someone needs to call their loved one or receive a call while they're in church so they could use the church TTY machine phone to communicate with the outside world. We don't think that's important. We don't think that one person in a wheelchair coming on the bus, you got 50 people on the bus, you only one person with the wheelchair, but they don't even want that one person on the wheelchair. It's just too much trouble, takes too much time. I got to be to work in 5 minutes. I got to be to work in 20 minutes. And getting that person in and sitting them in and tying them in and buckling them up and all that kind of stuff, it's just too much trouble. They're not worth it. That's the bottom line. We're not worth it. Legislatures, both federal and state, are arguing right now about keeping Medicaid and Medicare and other entitlement programs alive. Because we don't think they're worth it. They're not talking about cutting back on any significant cuts on other areas, like maybe congressmen's salaries, senators' salaries, presidents' salaries. Some of these people that work in the White House, some of these people that work as interns and aides to these senators and congresspersons, nobody's talking about cutting their salaries. Nobody's talking about cutting out their medical benefits. It's always the disenfranchised amongst us, which is the majority of the people, actually, in the country. First ones that ever want to cut out and cut back and increase the defense. We got bombs now that can destroy the world 20 times over. Let's make another one so we can destroy the world 21 times over. We're the greatest army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Coast Guards in the world. We want to make it bigger. Spending millions and millions across this country to give the police force weapons that they use in wars against our own citizens. Spending millions of dollars on these things. Nobody's talking about cutting back on these things. Giving tax breaks to the richest people in America. Nobody's talking about cutting back anything for these people. The ones we're talking about cutting back on are for children and nutritional programs, people who have disabilities, people who have preconditioned situations, people who are senior citizens, mothers who don't have enough money to get the kind of medical care whether prenatal or postnatal care that they need. The most impacted people in this country are the least treated with dignity and with respect. So what do? Parents may not kill their toddler if they learn she has autism. They may not execute a 10-year-old with spina bifida because they think she or he would be better off dead. But since disability itself does not justify killing, the killing of disabled-born babies could only be justified if the unborn did not have the same value and right to life as human beings at later developmental stages of life, like toddlers and 10 years old. Pro-choice and right-to-die advocates propose that a fetus is not a human baby until it takes its first breath outside of the mother's womb. The courts, time and time, have said you cannot use the term baby when you talk about a fetus within the mother's womb. It's still an embryo. It's still a fetus. It's not a human being. It's not a baby yet. There was a case very recently, and then an infamous case before that, where the courts decided, the lawyers argued, and the courts decided, and they agreed with the position, that the person who was accused of murdering the mother while she was pregnant would not be accused of murdering the unborn baby because the baby was not a human being yet. It had to first take its first breath outside the mother's womb before it would be considered a human being. So he was accused, he really murdered two people, the mother and the child, but he was only accused of murdering the mother and got off from murdering the child, wasn't even accused of murdering the child. So these advocates, these pro-choice advocates, these right-to-die advocates say until they take their first breath outside of the mother's womb, it's not considered a human baby. This is the most misguided, corrupt, manipulative position that anybody could take. It's closer related to science fiction than scientific fact. For when has an embryo that eventually becomes a fetus from a man and a woman ever produced anything but a human male or female? My mother had a child who was born with cerebral palsy. Arguably, I had the cerebral palsy inside my mother's womb when she fell over top of our dog and she had to undergo blood transfusion. I had to stay in the hospital 3 weeks while I was being in her womb. Was I not a human being then? My mother had 3 children, every one of the 3, including me, the one born with cerebral palsy, including me, all came out as human babies, human beings. I've never heard of a man and a woman procreating, and from that procreation comes a chimpanzee. Or from that procreation is birthed a cat or a dog. It's ridiculous. It's asinine. It's laughable if it was not so serious as it's to its outcome. When is a human fetus not a baby, not a human being? The sperm is from a man, which is a human being. Everybody acknowledges that. The egg is from a woman, who is a human being. Everyone acknowledges that. And the male sperm fertilizes the female egg, and a human being is in the process of being born. Anyone has ever seen pictures of fetuses and embryos, and certainly by the time it gets to the fetal stage, can see that this thing, this entity, this fetus, is nothing but a human being. Even when it has, at its very earliest stage, a tail. Remember, we all got tailbones. It had a tail. But everything about it had the fingers, had the eyes after a certain stage within the mother's womb. Not when it takes its first breath outside the mother's womb, but while in the mother's womb, it develops into a human being in the womb. Never anything to the contrary has ever happened. It's impossible. Those that hold to the position that a fetus is not human until it takes its first breath are trying to devalue the worth of the child. And they're doing that to make the action of mercy killing, the action of abortion, more humane and less barbaric, less offensive. But it's not. It's not. It is inhumane. Personally, myself, the only time that I believe that an abortion should be implemented is if the mother or the child's very life is in jeopardy for this child to be born. The only exceptions to the rule, the only one. Not because the child has cerebral palsy, not because the child has Down syndrome, not because the child has spina bifida, not because of anything like that, cystic fibrosis, or anything else. It's only when the life of the mother and the life of the child are in danger should abortions be considered, even there, as a last resort. I want to give you some pros and cons. There was a poll done. And I'm going to give you just a few because we don't have time to really deal with everybody's opinion because we want to we want to end this program before too long. We're going to end it within a couple minutes. But there was a poll done as to the different debates on the issue. Some were pro-abortion, while others were anti-abortion. And let me deal with the pro-abortion folk first. One person who goes by the name of Ask Christ says this: I see no point in raising, for example, a mentally retarded, I don't like that word, child. Take the emotion out of it and consider the fact that this person's life will never live up to any sort of potential and will ultimately die alone in a state of confusion. That's what Ask Christ. I'm sad he used the name Christ in this. But he believes that. I see no point in raising, for example, a mentally retarded child. Take the emotion out of it and consider the fact that this person's life will never live up to any sort of potential. What? Have you ever watched television? Have you ever watched a movie with a young person with Down syndrome? There's a series on about many children with Down syndrome and how they live very productive lives, hold down jobs and the rest. There used to be a TV show that I think during the 90s, that highlighted the life of one young man. I think his name was Corey or Courtney. He had Down syndrome, and it highlighted his life. So many people with Down syndrome and other developmental issues. Cerebral palsy is really a developmental issue as well. Another person says this. Now, this once again, we're talking about pro-abortion folk. A woman should have the right to abort any child under her rights. It is by choice. Our world is overpopulated as it is. Why should there be a child that will severely barely, I don't know how they're saying this, a society, if the child will have a disability that causes them to barely be functional in the everyday world? I believe that a person who is disabled beyond basic human interaction is not worthy of taking up our resources. The world's populated enough. We got too many people. We got 7 billion people on the planet. This person's life is going to be of no value other than taken from society. Why even argue the point? She would say. She did not give her name. Or his name could be him. A third argument. That Downs kid is going to contribute nothing to society. I don't know what Downs kid he's talking about, but whoever it is, he believes that Downs kid will not contribute anything to society. The best job they're going to get is bagging groceries. A job that couldn't have gone to a teenager looking to get work experience. I work with a person with Down syndrome because of my job, and they cause so much stress to the family, but they deal with it because they love them. I would definitely abort a Downs baby. This person is called I Love Fruit Snacks. Love shouldn't be a part of their posting. I would definitely abort a Downs baby. The life of a person I work with is not one I would want to have. They're never going to get married or have anything more than a mediocre job, and they're most likely going to get dementia in their 40s. And we completely dependent on you for everything. It's like having a 2-year-old for 60 years. Some of these comments, I tell you, they're more than pro-life, let me tell you that. They're more than pro-choice, rather. They're more than pro-choice. The final one I'm going to read to you is this one. Some people are aware that they are not the right kind of people to raise disabled children, or any children at all, or that it is not the right moment for them to take on such a task. I think it's a huge blessing to everybody that they know themselves enough to avoid decisions that might be disastrous in a lot of ways. In my opinion, this person has not signed his name or even a nickname. In my opinion, the real problem is the people who make decisions based on wrong assumptions or don't even really think it through. If a person makes an informed and thoughtful decision about something that might change his or her entire life, it should be respected. And it seems to me that the idea that everyone is up to the hard, but in many cases very rewarding task of raising a disabled child is an insult to the parents who choose to have a disabled child without being coerced. These are all the pro-abortion people. I'm going to read a few of the pro-life, or those who are against abortion. They say this. I do believe abortion should exist for only one or two reasons. One of those being if the mother's life is in danger. First and foremost, when you have sex, especially if it's unprotected, you are responsible for whatever happens afterwards. And even if the child can't do things like everyone that is healthy, this does not mean that they can't be the best thing that ever happened to not only their parents, but to the world as a whole. Mentally and physically challenged people have taught many lessons throughout history. It would be a shame to abort something or someone that could change our society for the better. This is signed by Callie Fox. Another one. First, I'm a proud father of a little girl with Down syndrome. She is 9 years old and doing okay at school. Yes, but reading and doing math at a first grade level. However, she is the most loving person you will ever meet. She accepts everyone for who they are. She comforts anyone who seems sad and is truly concerned for others. She is a very happy person with a bright future. So who are the disabled? The ones who love or the ones who think the worst of people? And finally, I'm going to read this one, then I'll be through. Abortion should not exist, in my opinion. This is signed by Roe Kaufman. Except in cases where it threatens the mother or baby's life. The problem is people are having sex and not wanting to take responsibility for their actions. One may argue that it is the mother's body and therefore her right to have an abortion. But don't all humans have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? If one has an unwanted child, regardless of mental disabilities, it deserves to live. Try to take care of it or put it up for adoption. Killing an unborn child is no way to solve a problem that you have caused through having sex. These are the pros and cons. What are your positions on abortion? When we're talking about aborting a disabled baby, a challenged baby, if you will, whether it be developmental, mental, or physical. What is your position on this very controversial issue? But before I leave you, I want to name you people and give you some names of folk that society would say were from moderate to severely disabled. From moderately to severely disabled, and should not have contributed anything to society according to what people think people with disabilities are all about. Let me say this again, as I always do. Some of these ideas from the pro-abortion folk, some of the statements made are not unusual. In fact, I think it was 54 were for abortion, 46 were against it. Close, but still the pro-abortionists were more than the anti-abortionists in this survey. But let me say this. The definition of disability is this, and that's why a lot of people subconsciously or consciously or don't even realize it, have formed this very ableistic point of view, this anti-disabled point of view. Because the word disability means this: anyone who is limited, anyone who is disadvantaged, and anyone who is disqualified from doing anything. That latter one is really powerful. Disqualified from doing anything. That's what disability means. The word itself means from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. The most highly respected dictionary in the world. It defines this disability in that way. Limited, disadvantaged, and unable to do anything. Disqualified. I like that word even better. That's what it really says. Disqualified from doing anything. But let me tell you about a few people. Some are alive even today and some have passed. The one I'm going to first mention, he's alive right now as I speak. He's Professor Stephen Hawkins. He has a television show on many of the scientific networks. On your television right now. He's a well-known example of a person with what we call Lou Gehrig's disease, a form of Lou Gehrig's disease, and has lived more than 40 years with the disease. Stephen Hawking, the internationally renowned physicist, has defied time and doctors' pronouncements that he would not live 2 years beyond his 21 years of age. He's had the disease for 40. They said he would not live live beyond 2 years beyond his 21 years of age. He's much older than that. Stephen Hawkins is 51 years old. Hawkins cannot walk, he cannot talk, and he cannot breathe without a life-supporting apparatus. He cannot swallow, and he has difficulty in holding up his head. But he is the greatest scientific mind of the 20th and 21st century, Stephen Hawking. He has a form of muscular dystrophy that is semblance to cerebral palsy. They say he had both of them. But he cannot walk. He cannot talk. He cannot breathe without some sort of apparatus to help him breathe. And he has difficulty in swallowing. Yet he has a television show, many of them. The greatest mind known as, not I'm saying it, known as the greatest scientific mind, and particularly when it talks about cosmic things. The black hole and all those type of things. Greatest cosmic, he has the greatest scientific mind in the world. He uses a voice synthesizer to communicate things to other people. He would be disqualified. I would venture to say, that if anybody should be killed, if anybody should be taken out of their misery, quote, unquote, should be Stephen Hawking. Born with some sort of disability, but it became so bad as he grew older that now he's, and this has been for the last 21 years, well, actually, the last 40 years, he's not able to talk, walk, breathe, or swallow. And he's the greatest mind, a genius in the field of science. Another one that would have been chalked off as too little too late. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was the 32nd president of the United States. He was president from 1933, when he was inaugurated, to 1945, when he died in office. No president, except for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, not George Washington, not Abraham Lincoln, not Thomas Jefferson, not Barack Obama, not nobody, has been president more than 2 terms. And no one has ever been elected president more than 3 terms. Franklin Roosevelt was elected 4 times. In 1932 he was elected, began his presidency in 1933. 4 years later, 1936, he was elected again. Four years later, 1940, and then 1944. He died in office as president of the United States. But Franklin Roosevelt had polio. And he, like his counterpart Stephen Hawking, was not able to walk. And was only able to stand with the assistance of people on either arm, as well as leg braces on both legs for a short duration. Most time you see him, he was sitting down. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We all know the great singer Teddy Pendergrass. Born right here in the city of Philadelphia. Pendergrass was a great singer. Sung with Howard Melvin and the Blue Notes. And then became a solo act himself. 1982, good afternoon, Shay. 1982, he was in an awful automobile accident that paralyzed him, and he had a spinal injury. But he went on to sing until the day he died. even introducing to the world an unknown singer at the time, Whitney Houston. Then we had Christopher Reeves. You remember Christopher Reeves, don't you? Superman in the Superman movies. Well, he was a great equestrian champion. And while he was riding his horse, the horse threw him. And he too developed a spinal cord injury. He went on to advocate. He did a few movies from his chair. But he was known to be a great advocate for spinal cord injuries around the world until his death in 2004. I go on and on. Johnny Tata, Erickson Tata, who founded Johnny and Friends, which is a disability ministry around the world, taking wheelchairs and other apparatuses around the world, opening up camps, summer camps, and the like for young people and even for adults to have a better, more fruitful, more productive life, independent life. Taking the Christ and applying it to working for those who, like herself, has a disability. She had a disability. Her disability was a result of her falling. She too was paralyzed, unable to use her hands or legs. She was a quadriplegic. And I go on and on and on, but for those who say that people who are disabled, whether you're physically, developmentally, or mentally disabled, that you have no value to life, that you're just taking up room, that you're the waste of resources in society, that there's too many people as it is, we don't need you anymore, you're foolish. Stephen Hawking has discovered and analyzed and has redefined the understanding of science and the universe. And he has a combination of CP and multiple muscular dystrophy. Can't talk, can't walk, can't breathe, can't swallow without assistance. Can't walk at all. And can't talk without a synthesizer. He'll be chalked off. Incurable. He has 2 incurable challenges. They gave him up to live no longer than 2 years old. Here he is now, 51. How if someone would have aborted him? How if someone would have used euthanasia on him? Assisted suicide or whatever. We would have lost a great mind in the scientific field. What if somebody would have said to FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that you'll never be president because you're in a wheelchair? That's a pipe dream. That's impossible. You're disqualified. You're limited. You can't be president. Where would we be in the world today? He took us out of the Great Depression of 1933 and 1929 to 33. He took us out of the Great Depression. He started Social Security. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, paralyzed with polio. He gave us victory in World War II. Where would we be without Franklin Delano Roosevelt? Paralyzed with polio, but served as president from 1933 to 1945 and died in office as president of the United States of America. Took us out of the Great Depression, took us and gave us victory against Hitler and Mussolini during World War II. Johnny Tata, Erickson Tata took the Christian faith and made it alive and real. The people who have physical disabilities around the world, in Africa and other places around the world, the most remotest parts of the world. She took the Christian faith and brought it to a people that the church has too long ignored. And she's a quadriplegic. Just don't know, do you? Don't count any life out. Don't even count your life out, no matter what your condition may be. You may not even have a physical disability. You may be psychologically or emotionally depressed and forlorn and confused and downhearted. Good afternoon, Shay. And feeling as though life has no meaning. But let me tell you, dear hearts, God don't make no junk and God doesn't make any mistakes. You're here for a reason. And until you fulfill that reason, until you fulfill that purpose, your life does have meaning. Your life does have value. Your life does have worth. No matter what anybody says about you, no matter what you feel sometime in yourself. Like my wife says every Monday and Friday in the morning, I am a winner. And so is each and every one of you. That child that was aborted, we'll never know what he or she could have been. Those that are being considered to be aborted, you don't know what you're carrying in your belly. And the impact that person is supposed to have on your life, your neighbor's life, your family's life, in the world. We don't know. Euthanasia? Now you understand why the disability community is against it. Good afternoon, Robert. Abortion? Now you know. Now you know why. Now you know why. Well, dear hearts, thank you for joining us. We hope that you join us again on Monday at 3 o'clock p.m. for another Chatting with the G-Man. We're going to bring you some more things, but share this video. I'd invite you to share this video with others. You'll be blessed and they'll be blessed. There's somebody going through right now that maybe is all depressed and feeling as though life is hopeless and maybe even suicidal and maybe want to end this thing. It's just too much. Share this video with them. Maybe there's a woman right now, a father and a mother, that's deciding whether they're going to have an abortion because it was diagnosed that their child has a developmental or a mental or a physical challenge. And they may think it's too challenging to bear. Share this video with them. And for those who came in late, rewind and listen to it all again. Some of you have had challenges. Some of you physical challenges, developmental challenges, mental challenges, financial challenges, relationship challenges, all kinds of challenges. If you live long enough, you're going to have a challenge. If you live long enough, there's going to be something that you're going to have to confront, that you're going to have to get over. You got to just roll it up and press it a little harder. Live long enough and you'll see what I'm saying is true. Until the next time, Monday at 3. God bless you. Have a wonderful weekend. Continue to pray for the victims and those that were impacted by Hurricanes Harvey and Hurricane Irma. And remember, Hurricane Jose is in the Atlantic right now, deciding which way he's going to go. Whatever way he lands, wherever he lands, may those that are in his path be safe from all harm. Until Monday, talk to you soon. Have a blessed weekend.